Good evening, this is Brew 16 and today we have a red ale. We're going to look at not racking but actually going straight from primary into bottling or kegging. Now I've used racking quite a lot, so why the change of heart? Well, we'll discuss that today. Today's recipe is a kit. It is a Brupaks kit for a red ale. So we've got all of the ingredients measured out for us. So that will make life a little easier. There are a few ingredients not included in the recipe, and I'm going to make a few tiny modifications, but other than that, this is a follow the recipe type exercise. Now, just for info, the modifications that I'm going to make are pretty small. I'm going to use distilled water rather than tap water, and I'm also going to make some water chemical changes so that it's a dry red ale style. So that gives it a little bit of a dry and bitterness type taste. So that's the goal for the water chemicals. Also, I'm going to give the yeast some yeast nutrients. None of that was included in the pack, but I do have some DAP and I do have some Fermento, and I'm going to add that into the recipe. Other than that, this recipe is not going to go through racking. Now, I've been a big fan of racking. It has done me quite a few favours. For example, one of the problems I encountered early on was clarity, and some of that lack of clarity was down to my inability really with the siphon, and I was bringing a lot of trouble along with me. Now, racking therefore was a very useful activity, but that was 15 brews ago. I mean, that's almost a lifetime, though in reality, in elapsed time, it really has only been around 9 months. Now, with that experience now comes, do I want to take it into secondary or not? And there does seem to be a very strong feeling that secondary isn't necessary. Now, there are some key examples where it is. You know, I think a mead and certain types of flavouring, and certainly my experimentation with turbo ciders by splitting into separate batches, all of those are really good reasons to move to secondary, but they have a very specific purpose. For beer though, it does seem that moving to secondary isn't quite so necessary, and lots of people are advocating the secondary is totally unnecessary. So this brew is going to be my first move in that direction, and I'm not going to go to secondary. I'm going to go straight from primary through to probably kegging or bottling. Either way, this is another brew with some more experimentations and lessons to be learned. So I'm very excited once again about this one. Let's get started. Step one though, I think, is to have a beer. This is a DME Real Ale. It has been around 86 days since this one was brewed, and I'm down to my last few bottles of this. Actually very nice indeed. The instructions are very good indeed, and the style and the taste of this brew. The deep red hue of this beer promises warmth and complexity. The malt bill is designed to bring dried fine fruits, and all the hops are dark berry fruits. Expect malty depth and subtle hop aroma and bitterness. Sounds very good to me. Mash is 60 minutes. Step one is to bring 3 litres of water up to 72 degrees. The temperature's over 60, that's almost 65. So I'm going to start by adding the water chemicals. This has all been sanitised, although because we're going to boil this later, that's not entirely necessary. So I want to make sure all those chemicals mix in before we get to the next step. We are closing in on 72 degrees, so I'm going to start easing the temperature down a little and start adding the grain. Oh, the smell of the grain is lovely. I've kept the temperature on low because we want to stop at around 64 degrees, I think. And the temperature will drop while I'm doing this early step. The purpose of stirring regularly is twofold. One is to stop clumping, so you're getting the maximum amount of sugars out of the grain. And the second is to make sure you're distributing it all around to get the maximum amount of sugars out of the grain. Right, we are at 64 degrees, so I'm going to cut that for a moment. The grain bill is 920 grams of pale malt, 130 grams of crystal malt, 50 grams of brown malt, and 50 grams of roasted barley, which gives a total of 1.15 kilograms, which is probably just about right, as we saw, for the size of the saucepan. The expected ABV is 4.6%. The EBC colour is around 35, which should be a golden red, I think, sort of from memory. And the IBU is a beautifully low 23, so a very small, tiny amount of bitterness really in this brew. That's about half the bitterness of a lightish IPA, I guess. So that's going to be sort of an interesting flavour, something that I'm looking forward to again. So the mash is underway. So just keep checking in every sort of 10-15 minutes, make sure we're keeping that temperature range. I've got that thermometer in there tracking, so all is good. Cheers. As is always the case, stirring regularly. The mash is between 64 and 67 degrees. It's time to start warming up the sparge. Heat the sparge water to 75 degrees. Sparge is coming up to about 60 degrees. We've got to get it to 75, but we want to add some water chemicals. Temperature of the sparge is at 75 degrees. We're going to transfer the wort into this pan, and in doing so, strain out all of the grains. So this is our wort. We're just going to cycle that through the grains. While that's going through, we can raise the temperature. This is our sparge. We've sparged the grains and we are now bringing the wort up to the boil. Let's not waste any. We are coming to the boil. The first hops are ready. The hops are a leaf hop. So Alexa, set timer 60 minutes. When at the boil, add your Columbus hops. These are our first hop addition. We are 40 minutes into the boil, and our next hop addition is 5 grams of cluster hops. We're 10 minutes away from the end of the boil, and these two ingredients were not part of the pack, but actually are ingredients I just happen to have around. So I'm going to add some Irish moss, 5 grams of Irish moss. That helps with clarity. And I've also got 5 grams of DAP, yeast nutrients, that will help with the yeast. We are at the end of the boil. This comes off now for 20 minutes. We're going to add our final hops, which is 4 grams of Endeavour, Alexa, set timer 20 minutes. It's time for cooling. Next step, we need to strain the wort before we put it in the fermenter. This nylon bag will help us with that job. It's time for a hydrometer reading. Having strained out all of the hops, we can see that we've got 4.2 litres here. We have 2 final additions. So this is the ale yeast that comes with the pack. So we're going to pop that in. This is a dry sanitised funnel, hence the funnel change. And this is the Fermado. So this is a yeast nutrient which will just help the yeast get going at the beginning. A lot of that does seem to be rather sitting on the top. I'm just going to help it out a bit. Giving it a bit of encouragement at this stage doesn't hurt. However, I'm not going to install an airlock. I'm going to actually install a blow-off tube. My experience with my last few beers have definitely been that they've got going pretty vigorously at the beginning, and I think, and I've typically had to change them to a blow-off tube anyway. So rather than sort of wait for that to happen and then have to clean up a number of airlocks, I am just going to start with a blow-off tube, give it a few days, see how it goes, and once it gets slightly less vigorous, which has been my experience so far, so hopefully this will be the same, once it gets slightly less vigorous, then I will switch it over to an airlock. And that's it for brew day. This was a joy of a brew day, it has to be said. It was pretty straightforward. all the ingredients were measured out for me in advance. It wasn't any extra steps particularly. The only slight difference was the 20-minute cool down step with the last set of hops, which is slightly different to a hop stand, but a variation on a hop stand, I guess. Cooling happened all very nicely, and the aroma during the brew day, still around, has been very nice indeed. So we will see how this progresses over the next few weeks, and effectively we will move straight from the fermenter into either keg or bottle, depending on which one we decide to do. There's going to be no secondary. We'll see how this all goes. Thanks for watching. Do click subscribe and like, and have a great day. Nine hours later, fermentation has started. Blow-off tube was definitely a winner. It's definitely got a bit more vigorous. Day 3, things have gone a bit quiet. Time for a bit of a change. It really slows down quick. An impressive amount of trub at the bottom. We have an extremely dark brown colour. I'm not sure with the reflection that's showing up very well. And still plenty of foam, though I'm pleased to say the bubbler has remained fairly clean since we changed it over this morning. I think this Krausen at the top is just stuck to the inside of the fermenter. I am so going to have fun cleaning that later, I am sure. This is our last day of fermentation before we stick it in the fridge to cold crash. So, welcome to my fridge. Ruby Ale is there ready to be kegged. We just need to cool the keg down. The Ruby Ale is ready for moving to the keg, and as we said before, we're not going to have an intermediate step, we're not going to rack it off. And I have to say, putting it for a cold crash does mean that a lot of the sediment and a lot of the trub has all moved to the bottom, so I just need to be extra careful. There is a little bit around the edge here, but I think that's on the inside of the glass. So, as we said, the keg is in the fridge, so that will help reduce the amount of oxygen exposure and reduce frothing as we siphon into the keg. So, time to get the keg. Before we begin, I'm going to purge the keg with CO2. There we go. So, hopefully I've got some gas left in this bulb, but we'll find out. So, opportunity to replace the bulb, I suppose. So, I'm trying to do it left-handed, doesn't really work either. I can hear the hiss going in the keg. So So if we let any gas out now, that should be forcing the air out. So what we've done is we've filled the keg with CO2. Seems more promising. We've got 10 psi. Now I want to force carbonate this, so I'm going to go higher. That's 30 psi. Okay, we are good to force carbonate this now. So this is going to go in the fridge. I'm going to take the handle off. I'm going to move that so it's slightly less height. Keeping an eye on the PSI just to make sure we don't lose pressure. No racking, but still that is an impressive amount of trub there at the bottom, and I'm guessing cold crashing really did sort of help with that. You can help get the whole thing started by giving the old keg a bit of a rock for about 5 minutes. Two problems though that you need to be careful of on a mini keg. One is you don't want the liquid going back up and into the regulator, because that will not do the regulator any good whatsoever. But other than that, it's just a case of giving it a good old rock, which I'm going to do for the next 5 minutes. Alexa, set timer, 5 minutes. Now the keg is pressurised, there could be a little bit of air still at the top, so one of the things we can do is just give it a little bit of a release, and that will let push any of the air out before we put it in the fridge. Pressure is still 30 psi. Just got it out of the fridge. It's probably about 15-16 hours. So I'm going to turn the regulator down a bit. It has lost some pressure. We are down to 25. It's brought it down to just 12. I can hear it releasing a bit of pressure. Yeah. Looks good. Very promising. Well, cheers. That is very tasty. Nice and chilled. I'm very happy with the result. It is a very that's a lovely malt forward drink. Colour wise, it is just like no ruby there at all. It's definitely up there with the stouts in terms of colour. Comparing my ruby ale to, say, something like a hobgoblin, you can see it really is the colour more of a stout than actually a genuine ruby that you sort of got there from the hobgoblin. Continuing with the comparison, this is the hobgoblin. Aroma-wise, they are quite similar. The difference is the hobgoblin is definitely stronger and definitely has much more of a sweeter tone to it. Yes, there isn't the strength of aroma at all from the Homebrew. Taste-wise, quite shockingly, there are some similarities, and the bitterness that you get at the beginning, quite light bitterness you get at the beginning, is very, very similar. The big difference between the two is in the aftertaste. The aftertaste on the hobgoblin is much smoother and much more of a rounded malty flavour. And the level of carbonation between the two is also quite similar. Despite the forced carbonating, I think perhaps just a little lower in this one, but the big difference between the two is in the mouthfeel and the aftertaste. So this is a little thinner on the mouthfeel and has some tannin type feel in the aftertaste, which just isn't present in the hobgoblin. Having said that now though, compared to perhaps when I tried it 10 days ago, the ruby ale here has started to come into its own. I do prefer the hobgoblin, but it is purely down to the finish. Actually, in all other respects, it is starting to come together. And I wonder, again, with a darker ale, whether it takes just a little bit more time. I am planning to bottle the ruby ale and put to one side so that I can try them in a little while, and that frees up the keg because I quite fancy doing something different. Hey there, cheers. It's time to evaluate. First of all, appearance. Well, our ruby ale did not quite make it to a ruby colour. It very much looks like a very dark stout, in fact. So didn't quite get there for the appearance. For aroma though, it does have a very nice aroma. I checked it out against a similar ruby ale, and though the colour was completely wrong, the aroma was very similar. That very, not sweet, but simply malty type aroma to it was fine. There's not much more to say. So, mouthfeel. Interestingly, as it goes down, you do get that nice flavour alongside it. But it is only in the aftertaste you do start to get something of a dryness that comes back. That sort of, not exactly tart, but certainly a bit of that tannin feel to it. Taste though, it does almost hit the mark. It is exactly what you would expect from a ruby ale. It's not particularly bitter, but it has a sort of a small element of bitterness. It's not at all hoppy, despite the 3 different types of hops that were added. There is simply just sort of not a strong hoppiness to it at all, and it's quite, you know, it's impossible to detect in the aroma. It's a very malty and pleasant taste to it. I did try it a few weeks ago and that aftertaste was very strong. Now it has smoothed a bit. Yes, that aftertaste has smoothed quite a lot. It is still there, it still comes back, but not in that sort of a little bit too harsh type feel. I think it did just need a little bit more aging, and I think this probably does also, as a dark beer, need a little bit more aging. I've got a little left, so I'm not going to finish it off. I'm actually going to put a few into some bottles and save them up to try again in a few months' time. Okay, I'm going to take this off, put the spearhead on, use the counter pressure bottle filler just to fill up with whatever I've got left in here. Step one, let's just take this right down. Beer lines in, this is the gas splitter. Gas in. Air out. Gas in. Air out. Beer in. Thank you for watching the latest video on our Ruby Ale. It's in the bottle and I'm going to put that away now for a little while and try that again soon. Now, one of the things I set out to do during this homebrew was not to go into secondary, which is exactly how the process ran. So what did I learn from that? Well, actually at the moment I feel still quite neutral about it. The bottom line is there are lots of benefits to not racking, such as avoiding any oxidization, so sort of the risks there, less washing up for a start, and just a little bit more simplicity in the process. For all of those benefits, I definitely was an advantage. I still do worry about the whole process of moving from one stage to another and the amount of sediment that goes through. Now that wasn't particularly an issue, so so far so good. But in the back of my mind, that was always the reason that I quite liked going through the various steps. But for now, this is my new process. So no secondary for a while, other than, you know, specifics like some flavouring for some apple cider I've got going for Christmas. But, you know, that's a different story. Now, there were a few other lessons learned along the way. So one of the things I was expecting was around about 5 litres of volume, and it came out at 4.2 litres. So there was definitely a bit of a volume control problem, and that led to 2 other issues. First of all, the ABV was higher than expected. So the ABV came out about 5.5 and the target was 4.6. So it came out as a stronger ale. More importantly though is the darkness. I think part of the reason for it being far darker than I expected was actually down to the fact I needed to sort of thin it out a bit, and actually I should have actually increased the volume back up to 5 litres at that stage. It would have brought down the ABV a little more into the target zone, and it would have potentially have lightened the colour a little. I'm not sure enough, but would have potentially lightened the colour a little to put it more back into that ruby range. Now the final gravity, actually funny enough, did work out in the right zone. So it was the starting gravity that really sort of that really caught me out. So actually, if I'd have simply diluted a bit, it would have brought that starting gravity down a bit. So lesson learned. One to watch a little bit more closely, especially when the range of difference was quite significant. So I'm looking forward to trying another one of these in the future, but for now this one's just going to go into the cupboard for a little while. So thank you so much for watching this video. Please do like and subscribe. I'd love to sort of hear more from you as well, so please do comment too. And thank you so much. Have a great homebrew. Cheers.